Great. Thank you all very much. So I just want to say good morning and welcome to everyone. My name is Lisa Guernsey. I'm the director of the Early Education Initiative here at the New America Foundation. And I'd like to welcome you all to what I know today will be a very exciting and thought-provoking forum. We have an amazing group of people here in attendance, not just on the panels, but just within the whole room. We have folks from San Francisco, San Mateo, Michigan, New Jersey. We have an amazing array of national thought leaders in early childhood education and early education here with us as well. And we have a really nice sprinkling of folks from school districts who are really interested in knitting together the services that are needed to build the continuum that we're going to be talking about today. So thank you all for being here. Many of us are here because we believe in what by now is almost cliché. For all children to reach their full potential in school and in life, they will need support at the beginning, starting in the months before birth and throughout early childhood, a period that extends through the third grade. The problem is that education policy hasn't caught up to this before birth through third grade vision. What changes are needed at the federal, state, and local level to help build a high-quality early learning system that connects seamlessly to the public schools and builds within them? How can school districts improve elementary schools and play a role in creating environments that foster success for their future and current students? So to help provide some context and talk a little bit about the moment that we're in now, I've asked Adele Robinson of NAUIC to come up and just give us a few words to get us started this morning. So I'll turn it over to Adele.
So first, I want to thank New America and Lisa in particular for putting together this fabulous day and for thinking so out of the box about who should be here together. And while many of us know each other, I am pleased to see many faces that I don't know, and I think that's so important to expand the birth date movement through all different levels and types of people who may not have been able to come together before. So thank you for being part of this, and Lisa and New America for the day. I was thinking about how would I describe the moment we're in, and it really came to me as Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities is both the best of times, because we really have now a movement on prenatal through third grade. More and more people respect and understand the importance of early childhood all the way through the early grades, and we're here today to press that even further. But it's also some of the worst of times. And while we sit here planning, which I think is really important, and trying to push better practice and policy and research, down the street, we are facing some of the most horrific cuts to the programs that support this kind of work that we've ever seen. We're looking at 368,000 children losing child care and Head Start. We're looking at massive cuts to Title I and to IDEA. We just lost in this CR a lot of the literacy money that goes to school districts. So we're in this sort of topsy-turvy period, and I would be remiss as an advocate not to ask you to call your U.S. senators right now, because March 18th is looming and things could get worse in helping us move this agenda forward, because the public money is so critical, and especially in the birth to 5, but also in the K-3 years, the federal money. So as we do this today, I want to honor all of you for keeping with it and to be part of this process for the long haul, since we all know that these are ups and downs that we've experienced before and will continue to. So thank you, and again, thank you to New America.
Yeah, that Tale of Two Cities reference, I think, really rings true right now. I want to take a moment to just outline how the day will go and what we can expect, and set some goals for what we'd like to accomplish today. First of all, we really want to go deep today, which is why we've provided a full day, and hopefully there will be moments to get up and move around, and even if necessary to go outside. see a little bit of the nature out there. But we also want to just spend as much time as possible really asking questions and not being afraid to ask some of the hard ones. We're going to start with 2 panel discussions. The first will be on funding, and the second will be on quality. And then we're going to feature some, actually, there has been a slight change. So as you're looking at your agenda, you're going to notice that this is a little different than what's written there. This is just based on a last-minute change from Roberto Rodriguez, who'll be joining us later. We are going to then, at lunchtime, we'll be hearing from Christy Cowers of Harvard, and she will be providing a presentation that has actually really helped inform my thinking on a lot of this. And then we'll have Stephen Hicks, and actually, Stephen, wave and say hello. We are very fortunate today. Stephen's going to join us for the full day, which I think is fantastic, from the U.S. Department of Education. So Stephen and Roberto will both provide some context for where the Obama administration sits within all of this, and we'll have, I think, a really great time to be asking some questions and see what we can do to support their efforts where they fit. And then we are going to be getting into discussion in smaller groups, and we'll have these roundtable discussions. And I'm going to be describing a lot more of those later in terms of how they'll work. But just know that we really do want to distill and extract some of the most essential questions from everyone in the room. And so we think that these roundtable discussions could be a really good time to do that. So as you're listening to the panels, and you have moments where you're like, wait, does that make sense? Or how could we possibly do that in our school district? Or how could we possibly do that given what we know about child care funding? Then write down those questions so that we can bring those together in that roundtable moment. We are then going to be unveiling our online forum space where we hope to be continuing this conversation. And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the afternoon. And then we'll have a nice break, and we'll end the day with a glass of wine and a conversation with David Kerp, who I'm really thrilled to say will be joining us possibly even earlier than 4 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock. He's hoping to be able to get here for some parts of the discussion as well. So to get us started and to kind of wet our whistle, I want to show you all a short video. And it's not Hollywood production quality, I'm just going to let you know right now, but I think it captures the what and the why of our mission. So let's watch. Imagine a world in which all young children are immersed in nurturing environments from the months before their birth, through child care and preschool, and up through the early grades. In the United States, we don't have anything close to a system like that. We have a hodgepodge of programs from birth to age 5 and then K-12.
We've set up a system that kind of cuts it in the middle or almost towards the middle. That's problematic.
Often folks are not talking to one another.
Teachers and caregivers are disconnected from each other. Children who are already at risk fall farther behind.
A reason why that joint effort is important to me is the growing evidence that we have substantial problems in terms of the achievement of children in these early childhood years. We have a substantial achievement disparity between groups of kids who are disadvantaged or racial and ethnic minorities and their more advantaged peers.
Without more cohesion, it's hard to come together to close that achievement gap. And experts see other problems too. There's the question of pay.
I think the disparity in compensation is going to be the hardest nut to crack. People are working very hard at the younger end of the scale and not being appropriately compensated.
There's the question of whether leaders, like principals, are well prepared to make these connections.
So many principals aren't early childhood people.
Differing organizations need to agree on common goals.
And really try to get kids to where they need to be by 3rd grade. I think it can be done.
The opportunities are growing.
communities are feeling new urgency, seeking out solutions.
When people really sit down and with pen and paper in hand and work to really hash out and clarify what they mean by alignment, what outcomes would really work at the local level, and what resources are needed to make those successes happen. So to deepen the conversation.
Examples range from newly engaged school leaders.
If the initiative came from elementary school principals, I think that early childhood practitioners would be gratified and would step up to building this stronger partnership for a birth to 8 system.
To putting more emphasis on kindergarten.
Maybe there are smarter ways to begin building in full-day kindergarten.
To inviting caregivers and teachers to the table.
Aligning not only our standards but our practices in the early years, and not only in early childhood programs, but home-based programs, early interventions, and also, as we've done in Virginia, in the home.
If we could bring early childhood people together with public school people and look at data on children's progress over time, I think it's kind of like a great way to engender conversations about what could we do differently.
Cross-pollination is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I loved Jerlene and Daniel at the end there. Cross-pollination is really what this day is about in so many ways. I want to, before we get to the panel, I want to thank our funders that are making this possible. The Foundation for Child Development has been a huge supporter all the way through this. The W. Clement and Jesse V. Stone Foundation and the A.L. Mailman Family Foundation have made this day possible for us. So we are going to be distilling these questions, and I hope you'll ask a lot of questions of the panelists. We're going to not have a lot of PowerPoint presentations. The panelists will be responding to moderators' questions and then responding to yours as well. So I am looking forward to getting started. I think this moment I'll ask all of our panelists to come forward for our first session. And I'll keep talking here as everyone's kind of getting situated. And I think that Janine may be on her way. Is she here? Okay. Yes. Thank you. Great. So yeah, we're going to get everyone situated. What we have here in this panel is a real focus on funding and funding streams, and this braiding and blending idea, or this idea of leveraging what we have already. As Adele said, we are at a moment right now where we don't exactly have, money shaking off the trees. So it's going to be really important to use the dollars that we do have as wisely as possible. So we are really fortunate to have this group here today. We have Walter Gilliam of Yale University, who has written a lot about this topic, and I brought him into this discussion today, not only because he's an amazing thinker on what children need and how to improve interactions between teachers and children in the classroom in terms of mental health consultations and helping them with their with children who may have what seem like problematic behaviors, but also because he's written a piece for a Brookings NEAR report that came out last fall that talked I think it made a very clear case for the need for a lot more coordination among funding streams. So, Walter, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And we have Janine Backey of Montgomery County Public Schools, who is, I've learned an amazing amount from Janine just in hearing how Montgomery County was able to create the pre-K-12 system that they have in place, and what she's been able to do not only within Montgomery County, but also being a leader at the state level and working with the state-funded pre-K program there. And we are also very fortunate to have Stephen Dow with us, who is from the Community Action Program in Tulsa in Oklahoma. And as many of you in the room know, the Tulsa pre-K program has been studied in a lot of depth by Walter Gormley, Deborah Phillips, and others at Georgetown University, and we've been able to see some amazing outcomes from children in the pre-K program there. Head Start is folded within that, and and Stephen will be able to tell us a little bit more about how that works, but also about how his program is working with the districts in Tulsa and where the challenges are within that. And then very fortunately we have Shelley Waters-Boots, who will actually be moderating this discussion for us today. Shelley is one of our predecessors here at New America. She was the director of the Early Education Initiative before I was here. So we kind of never even met when we were here at New America. And so she's going to take the reins here, talk a little bit about why this is a topic that's very close to her heart right now, and then get into some questions for the panelists. So, Shelley, do you want to stay there, or would you prefer to be at the podium?
Is it okay if I sit? I think, because we really want to create a dialogue, and it's too much
great.
to stand
okay,
up.
So I'm going to sit down for a while, and we have until about, I think it's about just a little before 10:30.
Okay.
And then we'll be moving into the other group, and there's a timekeeper who will be keeping you on track.
Good.
All right.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're as excited as I am about today, because for a lot of reasons, I think these conversations have been bubbling, and it's exciting to see a chance to really have a very broad conversation. And thank you, Lisa, for having me. It does feel a bit like coming home, which is great. And for those of you who know me, I've been off doing a lot of philanthropic consulting, mostly in poverty and opportunity areas. And it's fun to be back on a project now with a group of funders looking at a Birth to 8 agenda. And what I'm realizing is that which is very true in Washington a lot of times, all of these pieces intersect in very interesting, exciting ways. So I'm delighted to be here. I will say a couple of context-setting things before we dive right into questions. There was also a recent funder gathering earlier in the week, a group of funders that are really leading the way on a birth to third grade agenda. It's called the Campaign for, let me think, grade level reading. Thank you. Ralph would not be happy with me right now. But the momentum in that conversation was also, I think, very encouraging. A couple of observations from listening to that conversation is that on this conversation of really trying to get to prenatal to third grade, there is still an inclination to really think about the intersection between the birth to 5 world and the K-12 world. So I really want to challenge our own thinking today that if we're really talking about prenatal to third grade, we have to think even beyond that much, much needed intersection. So we're talking about health, we're talking about family supports and poverty, which I was surprised, at the gathering the last couple of days. Poverty didn't come up. Literacy came up a lot. Poverty was not a big topic of conversation, but I want to put that on our agendas of something we need to wrestle with. And so it was very evident that though everybody had the right frame, that the propensity of conversation still tended to really go to this piece around how we get pre-K and K1, 2, and 3 to kind of work better together. And that is an important piece. We're going to talk a lot about that today, but I really want to push all of our collective thinking about how we think about the other pieces when we really mean a full prenatal to third grade agenda. So with that, and that a bit of, you now know my bias in trying to moderate a very full discussion, I think we're going to try to just get a lot of issues on the table, talk fast, and learn from these great experts, but there are a ton of experts in the room too, so we're going to really open this up quickly. So I'm going to start with the most obvious question for all of you, as the great both thinkers and weavers of public funding. No one questions the need for more integration and this braiding and blending. What do you see from each of your perspectives as the most opportunistic or the best promising approaches to doing this work? And I'm going to start with you, Janine, since you are on the front lines in the school district. But we're gonna work from school district, I think, out to some of these other funding streams and ideas.
Great.
So tell us how you're doing it.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been able to do really very successfully was to expand a half-day Head Start program to full day. And really, to provide some context for you, we have a larger school system plan that really targets children in the early grades, and we've done a lot of work sort of back mapping to include the pre-K to 12 or pre-K to college ready agenda. And then also some supporting programs that focus on the birth to 3 in very high poverty communities. So the framework for that is really called the Early Success Performance Plan. And under the leadership of our superintendent, Dr. Jerry Wiest, over many years, the support of the board, the county council, county executive, and others, this Early Success Performance Plan has really grown. And it's an aligned system. It's a P3 model that's really aligned, that focuses emphasis, attention, funding, investment really in the early grades. So several of the things that includes are really ensuring that we have high quality programs for our students, especially starting with the pre-K age, to make sure that there's really an aligned curriculum and a system of supports for PK through grade 3 that really hopefully will help to get our children on or above grade level by grade 3 and beyond, to kind of get them on that trajectory to make sure that they're successfully completing their school years and that they'll be ready for options by the time that they graduate. This program also includes additional targeted supports. There's some system-wide components, but there's some additional supports that were provided in high poverty areas. Title I schools reduced class sizes in the early grades, additional summer enhancement programs. We implemented full-day kindergarten throughout the entire school system, starting really with the high poverty schools. And we've done an extensive, that's sort of just a brief overview, but we've done an extensive amount of work really with parent outreach. And Montgomery County, not too far from here, is a very, very diverse county, and we have families from really all around the world, many languages, many countries. So we've really made a concerted effort to reach out to families to make sure that we have translation available, that we translate documents, we have interpreters at programs, and we have staff who have bilingual capabilities and other skills who can help to support the cultural needs of the families as well. One of the things that we also have done is really to provide a strong emphasis supporting children in poverty, children who are struggling in reading and math, also with an emphasis on supports for English language learners, of which we are having lots more children coming into our programs, especially at the pre-K level. But one of the really wonderful things that we were able to do was to look at our half-day Head Start program. And we have this umbrella program, which is pre-kindergarten and Head Start, and they were all previously half-day programs. And what we were able to do was to really look at the state requirements for pre-K, look at our local funding, look at the federal Head Start grant funding, and then also use Title I targeted poverty dollars to work together to give our poorest kids a full-day program. So the children in this, the children who are eligible for pre-K are eligible for free and reduced price meals. However, the children who are eligible for the full-day Head Start are at or below the federal poverty level, about $22,000 for a family of 4. So one of the things that we were able to do was kind of to braid these funds together in order to make a full-day program. And we've done some evaluation over the last couple of years on that program, and we found that the children who attended our half-day pre-K programs were more likely to reach the benchmark and maintain that by the end of kindergarten. However, the children who had the full-day Head Start experience were at or above the benchmarks for the next grade level, and they sustained those through the end of kindergarten. So we're continuing to do some study on that, but we found that it provided the greatest benefits for our poorest kids, not just in terms of the academic readiness and the foundational skills, but even more so the social skills, the self-regulation, understanding routines, and to really help to provide those additional supports that are mandated under Head Start for the families. And we also provide those for pre-K. But I think there have been lots of challenges that we faced in trying to do this. You've got Head Start federal performance standards, you've got state regulations for under Code of Maryland for pre-K, and then you've got local expectations in terms of academics, and so you're trying to make sure what you're doing with the dollars is aligned with what the guidelines are for each of those individual programs. And so we have been able to do it, but it really takes a lot of wrangling. It takes a lot of monitoring and implementation, especially the fiscal piece, making sure that dollars that are allocated for the for the federal Head Start grant are really going specifically to those classes, and those teachers who are paid on that grant can only work with Head Start students. So really, we've had to make sure that we're in alignment with all those different guidelines, and we had to bring many different people to the table to sit down and talk about how we were going to be able to implement the program in terms of the curriculum, the standards, and making sure that, you know, the dollars are going. So the federal grant and the local dollars really support the half day, the base program, and then the Title I dollars came to extend the day and enhance it so that there's still a base program provided under that certain funding, and we're not supplanting that, but we're just providing an enhancement for the poorest kids. So I think, you know, it is possible to braid some of these funding streams together. It's not easy. It requires lots of monitoring, and there's high accountability levels for each of the different funding sources. So that's just one example of what we have been able to do to braid these together. And I think some of the other challenges are that when we talk about providing programs for all of our preschoolers, we really want to, ultimately, you'd like to have a mix of kids. You'd like to be able to have language models, maybe a mix of children from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but with the requirements for each of the funding sources, you have to really recruit and maintain classes of the children that meet those eligibility requirements. Mm-hmm. So I think that is one area in which you can use some creativity, but then there are certain limits to what you can do. So I think that's just one example. And then I think one other one quickly, because I know we have time. The other one is really that at our county level, we have been looking at issues about universal preschool and trying to extend beyond just the high poverty population. And so many of us, my colleagues from Health and Human Services, the child care community, and many others of us have gotten together to talk about how we could build some pilot programs in the county. And one of our county council members, Valerie Irvin, has really sort of took the lead and commissioned us to come together and form a group. And although there really isn't funding right now, we are trying to, we did lots of needs assessments to look at where our children were, where we needed more high quality programs, which programs were accredited, and then we tried to look to see how we could use some of these different funding sources, whether it was the subsidy dollars for childcare to make a full day for parents who need it, to make sure that the high quality pieces were implemented and programs were really aligned with all of our expectations. And so again, we've sort of come up against some challenges in looking at how you could use federal, state, or local monies that would be allocated for subsidies, rather than maybe recruiting each child in, looking at maybe a block of dollars that could be assigned to a program, and then you're just bringing in a mix of children, some who would be eligible or not. So these are some of the other types of issues that we've talked about at the county level, and it's really been a dialogue with the community as well. So the full day Head Start piece has been a part of it, but we've tried to extend that dialogue to the community, and we've come up against some roadblocks. So we're very interested in exploring ideas for how we might be able to be more creative, and maybe where there could be a little bit of flexibility in the guidelines, certainly keeping the accountability high, but where there might be some flexibility. So that's just a quick overview of some of the work we've been doing.
A lot on the table. And can you, one more quick question, and then we're going to move on to Walter. Can you talk a little bit about how state and local budget cuts have kind of played into some of your, what you've been trying to do with this braiding? Because my guess is you had an impact, right?
It absolutely has been challenging. One of the things that we did, the first cohort of the Full Day Head Start began about 4 years ago. So we were able to kind of allocate some of those Title I dollars to extend the day, and then when the ARA dollars came, excuse me, we were able to add a second cohort. And so now with some of those funding streams ending, we're looking at other ways to be able to continue the program. I think the other piece is that in the state of Maryland, there is a mandate. It's called Bridge to Excellence Act of 2002. And what it says is that every income-eligible preschooler who's 4 years old must be provided with a program if the parents come and apply. But there's really no additional funding that's come along with that. And so we've seen hundreds, more children, eligible children, certainly because more may be moving into the county, but also the recession and other factors. So we've seen hundreds more kids come in, and we've had to continue to expand our programs, but there's been no extra dollars to be able to do that. So we may look at the county's projections and the numbers and assign a certain number of additional classes for expansion, but we've exceeded those numbers every time. And so those dollars, again, have to come out of that local budget. So we've been very fortunate that we've had a board and a superintendent who've really have been committed and have a demonstrated history of being committed to putting the dollars in early learning. But it becomes challenging as time goes on because there's just more and more cuts, and we are hearing about them from the federal and the state level. And so really our challenge is to continue to serve as many children as possible and provide them with a high-quality program, but that costs money.
Right. Thank you. Well, I think you put a lot of issues on the table quickly, both about local funding, about state funding and state pre-K issues, about Title I dollars and how they can be used. I saw that Secretary Duncan said yesterday that early learning was going to be a priority in ESEA, so I think we have folks here who are probably going to be looking for some of these ideas to put into reauthorization. So I think you've put a lot on the table, and then Head Start, which is I think all of the main funding streams that I think for folks like you who are really trying to take a leadership role and weaving it together, we've got a lot on the table. Walter, would you talk for a minute about this issue of coordination and this nearly Herculean task that Janine does every day of pulling these all together? How can we make this the norm and not the exception, which it feels like it is a lot of times?
I can try and take on the first half of that. The second half,
whatever you want to talk about.
The second half that worries me. But first off, I think I have to say, God bless you, Janine. I feel like we've been waiting since 1971 for somebody to put the pieces back together again of a good idea that was fragmented. And I'm hearing you say this stuff, and I'm just really amazed, that you're able to make it work. And I just find myself wanting to make sure that before I leave that I'm able to pronounce your last name correctly, because I feel like I have a new hero, and I want to be able to say your name well. Back in a few years ago, I was conducting a study. It was a national pre-kindergarten study. We were interested in the relationship between state policies, state legislation in early childhood care and education, and how that legislation affects the policies that are implemented and how that policy is related to classroom-level implementation where children live. And despite all of our feelings about policy, children don't live in state capitals and federal capitals. They live on the ground where the policies either happen or do not happen the way we intend or do not intend them to happen or not happen. And so I had been spending a few years looking at these state-funded pre-kindergarten programs and praising the programs that had stringent policies and shaking the bony finger of shame at the programs that had lenient policies without ever really knowing whether the policy had any relationship at all to what was actually being experienced by the children. And for all I knew, these were just aspirational statements out of state capitals that really didn't have much bearing at all. And so when we conducted the study, we were interested in the way in which these programs look, but it allowed us to also be able to look at a handful of other types of things too. And one of the things that I'd become interested in when consulting with early childhood care and education programs is that I would oftentimes go into a public school building that might have a state-funded pre-kindergarten classroom in it or a locally funded pre-kindergarten classroom in it, and across the hall there's also a Head Start grantee and there's a Head Start classroom. And I walk into one classroom and then I walk into the other classroom, and it's literally like ending up on the other side of the world. But it really was just the other side of the hall. And a bunch of services that were only available and applicable on one side of the hall and not to the other side of the hall, and supports for staff that were only available to some staff but not to other staff. And of course we wanted all these staff to get along really well, but at the same time we resourced them completely differently. And it was mind-boggling. And if I could have looked at the children and said, it makes sense, then it would have been different. If I could have said, obviously these children need these services and that's why, but in fact it really just had nothing to do with that at all, it seemed like. And so with the data set that we had in hand, it was a sample size of about 4,000 randomly selected state-funded pre-kindergarten classrooms from across the nation, across the 40 states that fund state-funded pre-kindergarten programs. And these programs occur in all kinds of different settings. Some of the times the public schools, some of the times Head Start grantees, some of the times a public school that is a Head Start grantee. So you get this collaboration kind of model. Some of the times community-based child care programs that all get woven into state-funded pre-kindergarten programs. And so it gave us this opportunity to say, when a program is part of a state-funded pre-kindergarten system, but it is implemented in different settings, but it's still part of the same system. Does it look more similar or does it look more dissimilar? And when we looked at the data, what we basically found was what I would think most everybody in this room would probably guess. Head Start looks like Head Start, pre-kindergarten looks like school, and child care looks like child care. And the Head Start programs had a massive amount of comprehensive services. We were measuring 13 different areas of comprehensive services. They had way more than the public schools had. Public schools didn't have developmental screening, health screening, physical screening. For many of the kids, they didn't even have a lunch program because it was only a half-day program. Home visiting, parent involvement, all kinds of different things like that. The Head Start programs had in spades. And at the same time, the Head Start program tended to have much smaller class sizes and much favorable teacher-child ratios. Much favorable. And in terms of the data on that, how's this for some numbers? Head Start, 7% of the classrooms had a group size more than 20. In the public schools, pre-K programs, it was 22%. Head Start classrooms, 13% of them had a teacher-child ratio less than 10 children per adult. In the public school-based classrooms, it was 28%. So big, huge differences there. However, when you look at teacher training and compensation and working environment and life and stress levels, anything related to the way in which we treat the workforce, huge difference in favor of the public school. These teachers were better compensated, better resourced, they had better access to special education services, they had better access to support staff, they were better trained, better compensated, and had more help. And how's that for an irony? The people who were less trained and less compensated had the least amount of help. And it was, and so that was what we had in the public school. Neither one of these two segments did a great job at providing safe, reliable, affordable child care that was beneficial to working families. Head Start did a better job at it than the public schools because many of the public school programs were half-day programs, but none of them could compete anywhere near what the child care programs out in the community that got subcontracted into the system was able to provide, which worries me from the standpoint of if we have programs, no matter how well resourced they are, but are simply inaccessible to working families because nobody could get the child to the program anyway, what difference does it make? We ultimately price ourselves out of the children we would want to be helping the most. But then when I looked at the data a little bit closer, this is what I found. Aside from the fact that basically we're setting this ridiculous conundrum up for parents where they have to decide whether they want their child educated or serviced or cared for. And in fact, we should be providing all of these things to all of the children. But when I looked at it a little bit closer, and I looked specifically at the 9% of the classrooms that were in a public school building that was a Head Start grantee, and I looked at what was provided there, the level of training of the staff looked much more like the public schools because it was in the public schools. The amount of comprehensive services looked just like Head Start because it was Head Start. And to a large degree, they were providing better hours of care for families because they were blending the resources. And so when I see things like this, it makes me think, I think we can get it right. I just don't think we usually get it right. And my hunch is that the reason why we don't usually get it right is because our policies are not set up in a way to make it easy to get it right, and we don't have enough Janines to go around. And I think that's basically. So I'm going to quit talking because I want to hear what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
That's great. No, and we'll come back because I think we have more to learn from these blended pre-K, Head Start, school-based programs. And what your data showed us, but I do want to add Stephen into the mix. I also want to put a pin in this issue, which is leadership, because I think this is a key point that we have to tackle. And since the goal is to talk about money, but to also get a lot of key issues on the table, how do we talk about leadership and whose leadership? And accountability to what? To a system or to a program or a funding stream? So, Stephen, I know you blend all of these programs and more, and I want to especially have you talk a bit about, given where you sit in a CAP agency, the more holistic blending that you're also doing.
Sure. So as you all know, Oklahoma instituted universal pre-K back in 1998. It's a separate conversation about how that came about, but one that's important to know in terms of a couple of the provisions that really, I would say, more than anyone else, Dr. Ramona Paul inserted in the original legislation. And the two provisions that were most applicable had to do with, first and foremost, allowing the school districts to contract out those dollars to other child care providers and or Head Start agencies. And then second is having requirements that anyone that was receiving those pre-K dollars had certain professional development requirements that they had to meet in terms of the qualifications of the teaching staff. So those were a couple of really, I think, quite important pieces in Oklahoma's universal pre-K. The fact that it's an entitlement for kids, the dollars flow is great, but the school districts can only access it if they have physical space in which to operate pre-K. So it really set up a dynamic from the outset where I think that there was an alignment of interest, so to speak, in terms of child care providers and Head Start agencies and school districts really having sort of a real ability to work well together. That said, I would simply echo both Janine and Walter's comments about how incredibly difficult it is. And in our case, I would say we became the Head Start grantee back in 1998. The previous grantee had been essentially shut down by the feds for a variety of performance issues. And so when we first sat down with the school district as the new grantee, as one can imagine, there was not a belief at the school district level that Head Start was quality, much less a partner that they wanted to play with. And so it has taken an enormous amount of building of the relationships and trust for us to really get to the point that we can have programs. I think from our perspective, the driving force has always been that however complicated it seems to us to try to blend all of the different funding streams and try to braid together all of the different pieces, it is that much more difficult for the families to try to navigate their way through these complicated systems. And so it's just, we need to get over it and fix it and think about our work as sort of the wizards behind the curtain and to make sure that it's really seamless for the families. And if you were to arrive in Tulsa right now, that's probably what you would see, is that, you know, in our case, we have built on our nickel, and that's a different conversation altogether, how we have built facilities that are directly on the grounds of the elementary schools into which the children will feed and transition. And the financing of those facilities has been extraordinarily complicated. What pays for the programs within those facilities has been extraordinarily complicated and has required consistent negotiation and renegotiation and problem solving with our school district partners. And that's kind of, I guess, the other piece, is that, you know, all of the problems that arise when one is trying to blend the different funding streams, it was impossible for us to anticipate how many different kinds of problems were going to come up, how many different opportunities for barriers and to say this isn't worth it would come up. And at the end of the day, it was, I think, because of the resolve and the commitment of the people at the table to say we're going to just work our way through these issues and we're going to find a way to work our way through these issues. That has occurred with, in our case, since we set this up, 4 different school superintendents that we've had to deal with in Tulsa Public Schools, and then we also have relationships with 2 outlying school districts. That has been complicated by having then multiple Head Start grantees and multiple Early Head Start grantees within the same jurisdiction, and in many instances, quite frankly, they have not always made it very easy for us. So the one which has been probably the most challenging for us is a relationship we were building with a school district outside of Tulsa, and it involved our being willing to help support an expansion of some work that they were interested in, building on the model we had done in Tulsa, with a different Early Head Start grantee, where we're not the Early Head Start grantee, and a different Head Start grantee. And the Head Start grantee was absolutely adamant of not letting us serve kids in that area, even with our Head Start dollars. And as we tried to really figure out what all of that was about, it was complicated. But I set that as a context because that's part of what the real reality is. And we've had to negotiate incredibly difficult agreements with our school district partners. The pre-K dollars that they're passing through, the state never set a floor as to what percentage of those dollars they had to pass through to us. And that has been something that has been very difficult for us to have to negotiate. The fact that the school district was receiving other dollars on kids that we were serving and not passing those dollars through to us was something that we had to negotiate with them. So sort of issue after issue has come up. And I would say because of our relationships, we've tried to work through them, but I think it ought not be as hard as it is, quite frankly.
And can you say a little bit more about the other funding streams that you're bringing to both the kids and the families, in particular your Head Start and Early Head Start?
Sure. So, I think that also raises the issue of where it becomes very difficult from the standpoint of gaining an understanding from the different partners as to what those requirements are. So the mentality of the school district has not ever been one where they want to essentially do the difficult work of making sure that kids meet certain income qualifications before they serve them. To the extent that they're going to enroll in free or reduced lunch, that's sort of an additional thing they may gather, but the mentality is to serve all kids. So if we're setting up a classroom and it happens to be in a school district catchment area where there are over-income kids, and we wanted to sort of talk about how we needed to prioritize certain kids over others and all of those kind of things, that has made it difficult. That said, what we've then tried to do is say, okay, well, let's negotiate an agreement on, in a world of limited resources, which kids we want to make sure gain admittance, and then make sure that as the finance piece is put together, that the dollars that are used to fund services to any particular children meet the requirements of that particular funding source. They're dollar requirements that are used to pay staff and or contractors meet the requirements of those particular funding sources for those particular children. And that's involved in our case, Early Head Start and Head Start. And again, I have to say that it has not been easy about the fact that we have to requalify kids that are in an Early Head Start program for a Head Start program altogether again. The fact that we've had additional state pilot funding through a program that Oklahoma created, a Birth Through 3 pilot program, where the income eligibility are different than they are for either Early Head Start or Head Start. In this case of the pre-K program, that money is available to everyone, but under the state aid formula, we get certain add-ons as the children meet certain qualifications, so we have to track and monitor every single child to make sure that the money that we're claiming from the state is based on, and then sort of have all the documentation on those. So we have pre-K. In many instances, we have then also gotten child care dollars, although that's also been a negotiation with our State Department of Human Services in terms of their not really allowing allowing the child care dollars to be blended very easily. In fact, they've made an outright explicit prohibition against it and said that child care dollars could not be used to pay for any services if state or federal dollars were already paying for hours during that period of time. The Child and Adult Care Food Program has added some complexity to the mix. We then have certain private funding streams through United Way and private foundations. We've also included CDBG funding from HUD to pay for various aspects of either facility development or program operation. And then districts funding that the district often controls through either the regular state funding that they get, both the state aid and the local property tax revenue that they get, the bond dollars that they receive, and then Title I and Parents as Teachers funding. So it's quite a few.
Wow. And I know... Actually, I'm going to toot your horn
and
a
then
little
IDEA
bit.
money as well.
IDEA, and I also know you recently got a great federal grant to be actually working with parents of the Head Start kids on a health pathway employment project, which is also another panel for another day, but you should pick his brain about it because it's brilliant. So we heard a lot more in addition to, I think, some of the main ones that come up. So the food program dollars. I really like and appreciate you bringing up the issue of facilities, because a lot of times we think about that they're just buildings waiting to be had to run these wonderful blended programs. So I think talking about facilities and facilities financing is another good topic on the table.
We've also, just one other quick piece, we've also then, not directly but indirectly, for all of the kids that we're serving through contractors, either through our family support contractor or through our healthcare providers, they are required to access Medicaid dollars and other dollars that they can get for mental health services before being able to draw any dollars from us, and we monitor the extent to which they're drawing down available dollars as a part of our contract for service provision from them.
Great, yeah, because that was one of my follow-ups, I think, on some of these services that Head Start tends to cover with Head Start kids. But if you're really trying to build out these comprehensive birth to third grade services, you know, the health funding, the family support, the income support dollars, all of these other pieces that could get, I mean, it seems already overwhelming, but could even get more if you're really trying to build out all these funding streams. So I'm going to do one quick follow-up, and then please have your questions ready, because I'm sure you're all sitting on quick questions. But Walter, I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up. I mean, IDEA came up, but can you talk a little bit about special populations in this context? Because not only are we trying to blend all this funding, but as Janine pointed out, we're also trying to create classrooms that aren't segregated by income, that are specifically meeting the needs of different kids at different places. Can you talk a little bit about this also bifurcation with kids with special needs and also English language learners, and how we also bring both those funding streams but also this sort of comprehensive vision together? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. As most people know, there's a child find mandate for children with special needs, and I think I know where the children are. I think they're in the child care programs, and I think they're in the Head Start programs, and I think they're in the public schools, and the fact that we don't have universal systematic screening across all of these sectors and wait for them and then go out and search and seek them like a crazy Easter egg hunt. That I don't understand, because we know where the populations are hiding, and so one thing that in terms of like special populations, and when you say special populations, I'm assuming that you're meaning specifically children with disabilities.
Well,
but
yes.
yeah, so one thing would certainly be thinking about universal screening and some overarching system for which that data would go into, so that we could actually monitor that the screening actually resulted in referrals, and that those referrals were actually acted upon. That's one thing. Another thing that I've never really fully been able to wrap my head around is the persistent existence of the 10% rule in Head Start that made sense when it was made, but I'm not quite sure I'm following it now. And at the time that it was made, this was before we had Part B programs and Part C programs, and it made a lot of sense then. And now what it basically means is that we have a program that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes doesn't have a lot of access to and supports from special education community, trying to compete with programs that do, to try and gain access to those children, instead of us trying to figure out ways to be able to build collaborative relationships between them, so that the special ed service isn't owned by the public schools. And there's no reason that I can think of that special education has to be owned by the public schools. Coordinated through the public schools, yes. A part of the public schools, yes. Exclusive to the public schools, that's where I don't understand. And so when we have Head Start fighting to get access to children that they're not typically staffed to be able to serve the developmental needs of, against programs that are served but can't possibly find a way to share those resources outside of their own building, that's very problematic for me. And in terms of the bilingual issues, I mean, I think that's an issue that cuts across no matter whether we're talking about public schools or Head Start or child care programs. Is children who don't come from a family who speaks primarily English, and whether or not we have an early childhood education workforce that's truly prepared for that, and what it means to prepare an early childhood workforce for that. So it's a great question, but I don't know if in the context of what we're talking about today I can really fully address it.
That's all right. I'm sure we have some experts out there weigh in. All right, one more quick financing question, because I'm going to kind of try to keep getting these dollar issues on the table. So for Janine and Stephen, home visiting money. Again, we haven't talked much about babies, so let's put babies back on the table a little bit too. But how are you thinking about what's coming down on home visiting? And I know you're already doing some of that through your early Head Start work, but can we talk briefly about this funding stream? At least put a few ideas on the table, and then we're gonna get hands shooting up. Do you have any thoughts?
Just
any
briefly
worries?
That we. I guess in Montgomery County, the Infants and Toddlers program is sort of a collaboration between Health and Human Services and the public schools. So there are a cadre of home visitors that go out to serve children, the birth to 3 population. Many of them are part of the public school system. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is really that the federal Head Start grant mandates home visits for students who are in the Head Start program, but we've tried to still maintain that for pre-K, to have home visits. There may not be as many as are provided for Head Start, but we still provide those for the families using local dollars. The other piece of it, too, is that the Head Start program is a good one. And so our pre-K program is really modeled after that. So some of the funding for additional things like transportation or other things are provided through the local dollars. So, I mean, there are some concerns about some of the ARA dollars drying up because they've been used to help provide some training for home visitors and for some of the child care community in terms of helping to support inclusive child care environments. And when some of those ARA dollars dry up, some of that opportunity for professional development, those dollars will go away.
Right. Okay, thanks. Stephen, you have any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where a couple of things. One, on the sort of flexibility of those dollars. Several years ago, we decided to take some of our early Head Start dollars and contract back with one of the local school districts to supplement the funding they were getting from the state for the Parents as Teachers program, because we were concerned that number one, in the district, they were not prioritizing low-income, at-risk kids for enrollment in PAT, in the Parents as Teachers program, and in fact, it was really in response to where the demand was, and the demand was mostly from middle-income parents. So with a lot of work, we sort of said to them, we'll take our early Head Start dollars, we'll supplement the amount that you're getting from Parents as Teachers so that you can really increase the dosage, so to speak, in terms of the frequency of the visits to parents and do the comprehensive wraparound services. But if you're going to do that, we want to make sure that you prioritize at-risk kids first. And so, and then we'll then feed them into our center-based program, and we'll prioritize their enrollment into our center-based program so that there's a seamless transition. And that was something that they were happy to do, and we were able to do, and that has allowed us to basically shift some of our center-based early Head Start money into home visiting. As we've looked at the other funding streams that are coming available to the state now, it's been having to be a little bit difficult working at the state policy level to make sure that quite frankly, Tulsa is going to get a fair share of those dollars. But with that, the relationships that we've built both with the Nurse Family Partnership Program that's already in existence in Tulsa to supplement that, and then Parents as Teachers and Early Head Start, we've got the framework and the relationships to build on it.
Great. Okay, so who? Wow. Okay, let's take. We'll start. Harriet, Hetty, Albert, Karen. In that order, and then I'll get to, is that Patty? I'm sorry, I can't see. Go ahead.
You want me to stand up? Or?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, it'll help folks in the back here.
I'll help. So, actually, Carrie, wait for just 1 minute. So we're going to need a microphone. I should have mentioned earlier that we are streaming, live streaming, and there are some people who I know are watching online and they're going to want to hear everything. So.
And actually, if the panel doesn't mind, let's take maybe 3 of these, get 3 questions on the table, and then you can pick and choose which answer, but that might help us get to, there's lots of hands, so that'll help us maybe get through a lot of them.
Okay, so one of the things I was really struck by in these thoughtful presentations was the actual complete inefficiency of making decisions about blending and braiding and putting all the programs together into provider service level issues, whether they are district level or, in Stephen's case, community agency. And I think each of the specifics that were offered also showed the problematic institutional barriers, basically, that whoever it is, the lead entity, all right, and the partner entities face. Complicated relationships, renegotiation as people change jobs, and a sense of who's more correct about the proper approach. So having that as a context, there are a couple of things that I wanted to put on the table around problem solving upstream rather than downstream for reaction to. The first is on the issue that Stephen raised around the fact that culturally, community organizations are actually very experienced and used to doing determinations of income eligibility because, in fact, most of their funding streams are going to be means tested. And districts historically, because we have had appropriately a belief that public education is a merit good and we don't have to income test to participate in it, and districts are allergic to doing quality income verification that would pass the standards that everyone else has to use. So one big idea is people have been very involved now as we're trying to get through healthcare reform around the concept of an exchange. And in the ways that an exchange is envisioned, part of the issues that come up are actually around how it is we qualify people across the different ways people will enter through the exchange to their options for health insurance. So I want to just put out there as a discussion piece the concept of really whether you could end up with exchanges for looking at these eligibility issues that would bring together Head Start qualifications, your child care qualifications, and where states are now going and have been, obviously, into some of their income testing in pre-K, and then there obviously is no income testing primarily in IDEA, birth to 3 or 3 to 5. But you could put together a lot of these things in another way and, frankly, tap into expertise that has been developed successfully in the child care system to serve the whole of the community. We had some minor examples of that in Pennsylvania for some of the programs, not as a systems issue, but as an experimental issue. But I offer that out there as one way to think about how do you cohere the partners and maybe leverage off expertise and the fact that we do want people getting things together as a kind of problem solving further upstream. Second thing that I was going to say is it does seem to me that as we are engaging, and those could be solutions that could be engineered both, by the way, with federal input or state input. I mean, there are different ways to get at those policy solutions. Second thing, as there's an ongoing conversation when Congress finally gets around to reauthorizing ESEA, and as these other reauthorizations come up, it does seem to me that this issue that everyone talked about, Walter, I think most forcefully, sort of saying that we do still have these underlying weird problems in the concepts of our early learning programs where, in fact, at the highest level, we all know they're supposed to all serve the same purposes for the populations. And, in fact, the people who are trying to run the programs are actually trying to articulate that. Their implementation efforts don't necessarily live up to it because the structures they're working with don't allow them to. Okay, they don't incent them the right way. So it does seem like we have an opportunity to start to build out some kinds of structures to align our standards and our expectations. Basically, that we ought to use some conversation about ESEA to do that, as well as reauthorizations in the other worlds, and to push on requirements with authorities from people who run our child care block grant programs, together with what we might make our state education agencies do in their leadership role. So we start to, and in coordination with the Head Start standards, so we start to get out there basically across these streams and across the players, the fact that there is a core set of operating principles in terms of the expectations for the children and the programs. So I put that out there, people's reaction to that. The last one, okay, is also in the problem solving to react to, is actually, Stephen mentioned the problem I know he's had in his region, what's really a state level problem around how you cohere and allow for, this issue of our funding streams to work together and the role of the child care block grant in that. And it seems to me one of the other policy things we ought to be talking about better, and not to put the burden on the child care stream, this includes Head Start and child care as partners along with states with pre-K, is rules of the road that would say that if we have a child that we know is in anyone's quality program, so a high-level QRS, a Head Start, an appropriately state pre-K, okay, all of this got to be to the appropriate standard, that the rules of the road then would be the continuity of the enrollment for the child in the programs that starts to create an upstream solution rather than a downstream solution. So those are some things to react to. The only other thing I wanted to say about IDEA is we ought to be promoting, the law says that LEAs have to control the preschool part of the program. Now, intermediate or educational service units can also be considered LEAs under the law. So I want to remind people of that in terms of different approaches. But also, we ought to be reconceptualizing preschool special ed. It is not a place. It is a service that gets infused in our typical early childhood programs. And honestly, if there's policy principle we need to get out there, that's the one I would put out there for people to start to talk about. Okay. Those are my food for thought.
Lots to react to. Let's take two more quick questions, and then and then we'll get some reactions. This guy.
I'm almost loath to add more to this.
This is the problem of having a room full of presenters. You could all be presenting.
Hi, it's a pleasure to see most of you again. It struck me a couple things. One is just that I think we're talking about a couple different kinds of integration. There's an integration to me that is about how do we integrate the services and supports and elements of a quality program for kids so that everyone gets, I think Walter talked about this, the same thing essentially when you walk into a classroom and make that. And then Janine brought up another kind of integration, I think, which is about how do we integrate programs so actually it is a mix of kids? I mean, I think that, and that does come from a public school system philosophy, but we know that kids learn as much sometimes from each other as they do from, the folks who are teaching in the classroom, and it gets complicated because unless we start doing fee-for-service kind of stuff, sometimes you actually limit the mix of kids that are actually within a classroom. Just wanted to bring that up. I wanted to add, just to lobby into the mix of this, I think there's a third kind of integration that I'm curious about, which is an integration about the information and data we maintain on kids and families and what they need. If we're going to have a real continuum of services from 0 to 8, you can't have every time they do an eligibility that they're going to have to do that 10 times because they just lost eligibility for this, and then they're going to have to redo it. Or data, as everyone knows, I mean, the attendance, I don't know what, my mantra. I'm sorry. My name is Hetty Chang, and I'm with Attendance Works, and you'll probably someday get tired of me here talking about attendance, which is this little known but very key issue. And as Walter and I one time talked about, I thought, well, let me predict who's going to be a poor attender in kindergarten. It might have been the kids who were expelled in pre-K, but if we also looked in pre-K at who was having poor attendance issues, you might identify, well, who should I target in kindergarten to make sure that they're in fact getting enough dosage on task, because otherwise if they keep missing, we're certainly going to exacerbate the school readiness gap that already came in. But we don't have the systems to know what's happening. And if we have home visiting happening to 0 to 3, not only do we have the eligibility information, but we may know something about these families, so when they go into pre-K, you don't have to start from ground zero to understanding what are the issues and challenges facing that family. So there's on the funding service kind of side, but there is also this issue of how do we and what does it mean when you're working, do we have an opportunity in working across systems to create some mechanisms so that we actually can maintain data that can guide the work with families, and also look over time on how we collectively evaluate the impact of programs, and what do we know is the mix of programs that certain kinds of families need so we get to better outcomes by third grade. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to sum up these into some questions in a minute. But
We'll braid them all together.
I'm going to do my own braiding. Right. Let's get one more, because we got a lot on the table, and then we'll see if we can.
And
Was it Albert?
Yeah, and if everyone would just introduce yourself briefly, if you're making questions, so people on the webcast can hear you as well.
Make it short, though.
I'll try to make
we
it short.
We can't take much more.
Okay, Albert Watt from Pre-K Now at Pew. So it seems to me that one of the things that can help make this not the rule and not the exception is that there's some, there's a role for states in this, I think, and we haven't heard from that because we don't have a panelist who works at the state level. So I'm wondering, from Stephen and Janine's point of view, in your states, what have they done to both what they've done to sort of facilitate what you've been able to do, and also what you think they can do differently so that you can do better, you can be more effective at combining these, integrating these programs and funding streams.
Okay, so let me see if I can put this into one comprehensive question.
Wow.
This is a test of our brain.
Just have sub-points.
Right. Everybody's gonna yell at me, but I think some of the themes from those three questions are issues of barriers with current funding streams, and are there governance structures that could actually help us overcome some of the what are the barriers? We've talked about some of them, but are there additional ones you can put on the table? And are there governance structures, whether it's exchanges, state level policy, to actually help braid this in a more comprehensive ways? And then I think to Hetty's point, are there other pieces that help build a coherent structure, whether in addition to governance, data systems, more logical accountability systems that are accountable to a system and not to a program? So how do you think about these issues of both governance, and I want to keep financing in, because remember, this is a financing panel. We're going to have time to talk about a lot of these other things, but to the extent that there are challenges within the financing that are creating these barriers, and how can governance and other pieces of system building help with that? And I might add even one more, if you want to throw in, because we do have policy and advocate folks here, are there particular funding streams or glue money, I'm teeing up the Early Learning Challenge grants, are there particular pieces that would help create that more systemic approach, if you want to throw in some ideas on that? Is that, did I do justice to the three very disparate questions? Okay. You want to start? Or not?
I mean, the general approach that I guess I'm concerned about is that sort of it doesn't ever feel that any of the funders actually are insisting that braiding and better coordination of funding actually occur. So in our case, there's no role for the state, quite frankly. I mean, we get the funding for Head Start and Early Head Start directly from the federal government. A different agency gets the funding for child care, the school district. So each one of them is answering to a different authority, but none of those authorities are really driving down, I think, from the standpoint of the importance. I mean, if it were in the performance standards, it would get done. I mean, when the fiscal monitors for Head Start come, they're not really interested, quite frankly, other than making sure that their dollars are being used for the proper kids and the proper uses. So I think to Harriet's point, until there's really a sense from upstream that local organizations on the ground really need to figure out how to do this, I think it's highly dependent on the individual leaders and the commitments that they have, both to try to build the relationships and to persist through what are incredibly difficult issues that come up repeatedly.
I agree with that, everything you just said. I think we're very fortunate in Maryland because, for a few reasons, concerning early care and education, as far as the state level is concerned, because A few years ago, the whole Office of Child Care was moved up under the Maryland State Department of Education. So you have the same organization that's overseeing the Code of Maryland regulations concerning pre-K, now overseeing the same quality standards for the child care community. So they've been working very hard to get more providers credentialed, to make sure that the accreditation system is in place and that more providers are being able to access that system. So at least publicly, what we're saying is we're having those same high quality expectations for all programs across the board. The other piece is that the state of Maryland has an established Head Start collaboration committee at the state level, and there's a person at the state whose job it is to help coordinate these pieces between Head Start programs, school systems, and otherwise. So I think they're open to the dialogues. They may not be opening up these types of conversations, but at least there's someone available who's open to these type of dialogues. But how you actually go about doing it is tough. So I think it's a matter of you have to kind of reach out, bring the community partners in, start this dialogue, and then oftentimes you're making these calls. Is this allowable? Could we do this? Is there some flexibility on this? But it's really up to the entities themselves to really, at this point, to kind of start these dialogues and move forward. And that can be a challenge sometimes. That can be a challenge because you may have these different expectations from different segments of the community, and you're trying to bring everybody together kind of unified on one point. One of the things we've been able to do at the state level and then across the entire state is to look at our school readiness data. And we have an annual assessment that's implemented in the beginning of kindergarten, and it's sort of it's called the Maryland Model for School Readiness, but it's really just a little bit of a data point at one point in time about where children are when they're entering kindergarten. So we've been able to analyze a lot of that data, looking at settings, looking at subgroups of children, and really looking by jurisdiction. So that's one set of data points that we've been able to use to kind of start this dialogue going with the child care community. We can identify primarily which children were in family child care, nursery schools, part of our pre-K program, part of Head Start, and so that really has helped to get a dialogue going. The other piece is that in the state of Maryland, we are mandated to serve all low-income preschoolers who apply for a program. So the state has actually implemented monitoring for the pieces. Someone asked the question about the income requirements. So of course we have standards for evaluating families' household income for Head Start, but we also have them for pre-K. And since the Bridge to Excellence Act was put in place, the Maryland State Department of Education has been going out jurisdiction by jurisdiction, overseeing this process, looking at rosters, looking at files, making sure that, one, we're recruiting all income-eligible children, two, that we have a screening process in place, and that, three, we're really going the extra mile to reach out to families that might need a family service worker to go out and help them register. There may be other family needs and things like that. So there actually is some monitoring of that going on. And then also the ACLU has been involved in that process over the last few years because they've been looking at the estimates of low-income children, the numbers for the entire state and jurisdictions, and then looking at the numbers that we have actually enrolled to see, are we really meeting the need? And we have to demonstrate that we have recruitment efforts. So ours is really a collaborative of social services, many different agencies, and we have a sort of a unified county approach to trying to recruit families and bring them in. But again, there are no additional dollars to sometimes build those extra pieces. The state does not require we provide transportation for pre-K. We provide it, we pay for it with local dollars because without it, a lot of our children wouldn't come. So a lot of those extra pieces that kind of help to support the children's attendance and help to support the quality aspects of the program, local dollars are paying for those. They're really not pieces that the state is paying for. So I think maybe having more dialogues that would begin from the state level to bring folks together to look at these opportunities, and then maybe some folks at the state who might be able to help to maneuver or talk with the feds or others about some of this flexibility, but to really, at this point, a lot of it is up to the local jurisdictions to come up with ideas and sort of pose them to the state and say, would you be opposed to doing this? But maybe there could be more dialogue coming from the state. And I think I'm coming from a great state in terms of early care and education, but we're often having these local dialogues within our own county and then reaching out to the different governing bodies to say, could we do this, could we do this, could we do this, that sort of thing. I don't know if I answered the question. I hope so.
In terms of those local dollars, too, I mean, those are not going to show up in most every national cost estimate that I know of. And so there's this huge other cost that we usually don't know much about. And because we don't know much about, my hunch is we don't do much about, even unless somebody takes it upon themselves to do it. In terms of collaboration and at the state level and things, we do have Head Start collaboration officers, but they have no teeth. And so there's really no authority that's actually given as part of that. Some states have early learning collaboratives at the state level. They're supposed to be about consolidating and I'm sorry, somebody told me not to say the word consolidate because she said coordinate. Although Ed Ziegler, my mentor, he once said that coordination can be a good thing, but it depends on who gets to coordinate whom. But so there are some mechanisms, but I'm afraid that we don't use them well, and I think that in the end it really boils down to not only not having enough money for the access, not having enough money for the levels of quality that we want, but that aside, it boils down to having very distinct, hard to change, sometimes even hard to understand rules around who is eligible and who is not eligible for this service that's so completely different from this other one, and means tested on different schedules and in different ways, and different sets of expectations and different sets of services, and because of all of this, different sets of monitoring systems that are put on top of it. And so my hunch is not only because of the fact that we can't better align and make opportunities for alignment in terms of federal and state policies, not only is it difficult to do what Stephen and what Janine have been doing, but the reward for that is huge, massive fiscal and monitoring headaches as a result of all of that effort. And I can't think of anything more tragic in early childhood care and education than the fact that we just can't seem to get on the same page. You know, to quote Rodney King, why can't we all just get along? You know, it boggles me.
2 more quick questions and then a response from the panel, and then we're going to have to wrap up. Patty? 1 more quick question, maybe one from me. Let's see. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, Patty Cole with 0 to 3. This has been a lot of food for thought and thinking about some of the issues that we're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years. So it's really been very helpful. But I wanted to follow up on Shelley's previous question about how you build in the infants and toddlers into all of these plans and how they're being built in at the state. And they often are an afterthought, and we know that a lot of the children that you're serving and when they come into pre-K are already behind, so it's really remediation. But how do we, are there plans that the states are undertaking, and how do we build them systematically into financing systems and plans to build those kinds of systems? We know that we can't just say that we have home visiting, so now we've done infants and toddlers. They're in a lot of different settings, and so what is the plan for systematically reaching them so that we've reached all vulnerable infants and toddlers, whether they're at home or in child care or the pitiful few that are in early Head Start? And before I turn it over, I have one last pitch. We have our Early Experiences Matter policy guide. We have a new early literacy and language policy brief and DVD that's out there as well. So please take one so I don't have to take them home with me.
It's a great question. As one funder said to me at one point, well, I like this birth to 8, frame, but I just don't know what to do about the babies, So I think that's a really important point. And let me, if I can, book into that question, because we spent a lot of time talking about this sort of the pre-K moments and integration. So in addition to the baby question, my daughter is in a Title I school in Montgomery County with a Head Start on site. But we were talking about this a little earlier, just completely, N of 1, sorry. But anecdotally, some of the things that happen in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd we would all pray, informed by this integration and developmentally appropriate work. So I can say that sometimes that probably happens in the school that my daughter's in, and a lot of times doesn't, from many other pressures that are coming from NCLB and lots of other places. So if on the bookend of babies, we could also talk about specifically any thoughts about kindergarten, first, second, and third, because that's we don't want to forget that's an important piece of this continuum. If you have thoughts about both challenges, opportunities, and financing around that piece of it, so maybe you can tackle both of those at once, since you guys are doing a Herculean task of covering all these topics together. And Stephen's sitting on an answer, I can tell.
Well, I mean, what I want to really make sure is sort of from a systems thinking standpoint. So one of the things that didn't happen in Oklahoma was because of the way the pre-K sort of funding developed, there was really not sufficient attention that anyone was paying to what it would do to the economics of child care, or to a certain extent what it would do to Head Start in terms of the competition for kids. And so essentially, as we expanded kindergarten, sort of moved to more full-day kindergarten and then opened up pre-K, essentially you destroyed the economics of the high-quality child care providers that were often, quite frankly, cross-subsidizing for the higher expensive infant and toddler quality care with the funding that they would get for the older age kids. Once you took those and presented to families the option of having their kids for free in preschool, the sort of older kids moved out of child care settings into the state funded pre-K system. From the systems response standpoint, I think the right response from the child care subsidy system and the Department of Human Services should have been, and still should be, to take those dollars that were previously funding the older age kids and use those to boost the infant and toddler reimbursement rates up to the point that you could really provide high quality services and really meet the needs of those younger age kids. That hasn't happened, and so I think we've experienced a net reduction because really the players aren't really all thinking about what the impact of that. Similarly, I think the response from Head Start could have been to think of sort of the expansion of universal pre-K as hugely liberating, and to say, let's let the 4-year-olds go to the public school system, and let's now take that money and use it to either expand the number of 3-year-olds we're serving, or, as I think Walter's proposed, use that to convert slots to early Head Start slots and increase the supply of high-quality infant toddler care. Again, that's very hard for the Head Start agencies to do, and in our particular case, I can say it's at a great economic cost, because for each one of the 4-year-olds that we're receiving right now from the school district, those 4-year-olds come with dollars that 3-year-olds don't come with. So for us to sort of say it's the right thing to do is great, but it costs us several $1 million a year to do that right thing in terms of money that then hits our bottom line and isn't available to us to make sure that we're paying our teaching staff the salaries we want to.
Wow, a lot more issues. Weigh in on babies or K through 3?
Babies or K through 3? Do
Or-
I have
or
to
both.
choose? Can I have them both?
You can
Will
have
we
both.
babies and
Both in 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds or less. Babies are very good. Elementary school is very good. And honestly, we need to be able to have high quality programs in both of them. And what Stephen's saying is absolutely correct. That if you do something that's going to have a huge impact on the segment, it's going to have ramifications in other parts of the sectors, and you start sucking the money out of those other sectors. One of the proposals that I did have was indeed exactly what he said, that as states start playing a more and more of a major role in the preschool age children, and even though things have staled out right now with the economic condition, I really think that the tide is in favor of the schools playing more and more of a role over time in preschoolers. Then Head Start's going to have to do something in response to that, and hopefully it's a collaborative decision. And one of the things that we proposed is exactly what you said, that those resources be converted down into more early Head Start services instead of the extremely paltry amount of Head Start resources that go into early Head Start. The other thing that we suggested is potentially disentangling those services that Head Start offer so that a school system or another provider that has a well-trained educational workforce doesn't have to buy into the entire Head Start model. They could just get the comprehensive services that Head Start does so well and infuse those into the public school that could be of benefit not only to the preschoolers, or over time maybe infants and toddlers if they start serving those, but could also be a benefit to the elementary school children. And that's certainly not an idea without precedent. It's not as if everything that happens in the public schools is ran out of the U.S. Department of Education. National School Lunch Program is a good example. And so we can certainly think of ways, I think, creatively to be able to have things that are within the auspices of HHS infused into the public schools if we were so willing to think that way.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have anybody from IEL, the Communities in School effort here, but I think that's exactly, a lot of what we're trying to figure out is how do you make the school the hub for a lot of those pieces.
That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Let's turn everything into a comprehensive Head Start.
It would really help. It would really help the collaboration, at least from preschool to elementary school, if the schools were the hub.
Right. And I will say anecdotally, again, the family support worker that serves the Head Start kids in my kids' Title I school serves all the families in that school. So she's not, I don't know if that's allowable. Hopefully I just didn't out anybody.
The parent community coordinators and family service workers.
Yes.
So everybody gets
so
some
everybody
support.
gets some support, but the financing comes, I think, from the Head Start and the leadership. So Janine, last
Just
word.
3 quick points. One is that this work, starting this dialogue with the community partners and everyone it's a lot of work. And one of the things that we've taken on as a county is to kind of look at this birth to 5 continuum. And we have some different projects that are a collaboration of community partners, but we're trying to look overall at inclusive childcare, all the different settings, and move from providing opportunities for some inclusive programs to a more systems approach. So to take a more strategic look and to look at how we can be more efficient, transportation, guidelines that fall under IDEA and the state's program and Head Start, and try to really look at how we can sort of expand that effect. So we're kind of in the process of having those dialogues right now. The K data point that I mentioned, the MMSR, is the one point that we can use to sort of capture about 11,000 kids and where they are coming into kindergarten. If you're enrolled in our programs, you've taken part in the local assessment for pre-K and Head Start, which is aligned to K1 and 2. So if you're in the system, we have that data, we can articulate that data on. Sometimes there are efforts to communicate with child care to the pre-K or child care to the K. But if you are not enrolled in any programs in the school system, really that K data point is kind of that first look at where the child is. And that sort of leads to one other point that I want to mention. In 2 of our school communities that represent real high poverty families, we have 2 programs called Judy Centers, and they're really birth to 5 comprehensive services. They operate under the auspices of the school system, but there is a steering committee of 15 or 20 community partners, everything from Montgomery College to look at the adult education piece, public libraries, youth services, children's resource and referral, many different agencies. One of the things that we've been able to do on a smaller scale, because it's such a huge issue, is to develop an MOU between these agencies and to have a parent permission form. Any of these agencies can be an entry point into the program, so we have a shared data system so that we're not kind of duplicating those same services because the resources are really slim. So we have to make sure that we're concentrating our efforts. But what we have work to do is to, it's a state and locally grant-funded program. It's administered by the state under 12 component standards. But there are MOUs between all of those agencies and the school system, and there is a point of when the parent comes in to sign a permission that it's okay to share information about other services they might be receiving. And I think for these individual groups on a small scale, it's been very helpful because everyone's coordinating and working together. But how you do that on a much larger scale when you've got the FERPA rules, the HIPAA rules, you've got all these different rules, and you have to be very careful concerning confidentiality. So I think that might be another issue if you're talking about blending different programs, blending funding streams. Each of them operates with their own rules about sharing confidential information. So that might be another thing to tackle.
We could get around that if we wanted to.
Yeah,
I agree.
If I buy something from one business, I guarantee you the other business knows immediately, and they know how much money I make,
Right.
and they know what my buying situation is. The other side of this equation is very good at sharing information. It's the do-gooders that are pretty bad.
Right. I agree.
Okay, so with that, we tried to put a lot on the table, so I'm going to wrap up, and we'll continue conversations. But please join me in welcome and thanking this great panel. And
Can I have one thing? I just want to acknowledge one of our former outstanding developmental psychologists is here, Cal Leonard. So I just want to acknowledge that she's here, and she's been a part of this work over the last many years, so I appreciate her being here.
All right, thank you.
Seeing her there.
Thanks, Lisa.